Hello, I'm Ron Fox for Get Woodworking, and we're going to carry on talking about routers and some of the things you can do with them. So we'll just have a quick look now for the next stage, which is to take a slightly more advanced version of this, made in exactly the same way, which will enable you to cut housings of almost limitless width, depending on how many guide bushes and how many straight cutters you've got. Well, now we've seen how our little simple slotting jig works. It was made for one purpose and one purpose only, to be able to slot and counter slot jigs, templates and anything else that need to be adjustable. I developed this in a number of ways since I made the original one of these, which was some years ago, and here is the latest version of it. It doesn't look quite like this, but it's got all the same parts in it. What we've got is a slot. The slot is 30 millimeters wide, because big routers, half-inch routers like the DeWalt 625, the Trenti 11 and most of the other big ones have a 30 millimeter guide bush as standard. So it seemed natural to make one for the 30 millimeter guide bush, and as it was for big routers, it also seemed fairly natural to make the whole thing bigger. It was such a lump that I tapered the end and rounded the corners just to make it look as though you'd made something, and it does make quite a difference to the appearance, in my opinion. The batten was glued on in exactly the same way as we glued the small piece of batten there. There is a notch cut in the middle, and with a V-grooving cutter or other pointed cutter and the 30 millimeter guide bush in, we put a shallow V-groove across there, which we can black out with a ballpoint pen. The other refinement, I use this for housings, including stopped housings. So what I've done is to make a stop for the stopped housings, an adjustable stop. And so on the back of this one, you will see with rather larger cutters, I've slotted and counter slotted the back of this so that I can fix my adjustable stop bar. If I now fix that, the other thing I've done, and this is something I learned after the first one of these didn't work too well, go to your fixings place and you want the sort of bolts, they call them various names, roofing bolts sometimes. They've got the square under the head. So if you make the through slot to take the square comfortably, that will not turn when you do the wing nut up from above, and that makes life considerably easier. Now we put this on. There's another little gimmick I put on here. That goes up and down there as a stop for your stopped housings, but I've put that hole in it a bit off centre so you can put it either way round so that you can vary the range of setting your stopped housings. It's only a detail and it's not vitally important, but you might as well put as many details in as occur to you while you are making it. So let me just put this on. And by pulling these bolts up and getting the squared bit there in the slot, you've got an adjustable stop, and I drew those lines across there, making it look rather like a shove halfpenny board, so that I could line this up if I'd got a flat sided or flat edge router base. It's quite convenient to have this going at right angles across, so you can see that's adjustable. So all I've got is a bigger and slightly more elaborate version of the original one. The slot takes my biggest, or one of my biggest guide bushes, 30mm one. I have cut slots and counter slotted them. That's an interesting chicken and egg question there. You're making a jig that will enable you to slot and counter slot, and you want to slot and counter slot it. So how do you set about it? Well, I've drawn the beginnings of one of these on a life-size piece of MDF. This is a bit thicker than the other MDF. It was 15mm. There is my 30mm slot. There is a proper or a perfect rectangle. There are the lines where I am going to slot and counter slot this for the stopped housings bar. And the reason I've left it like this, actually square, without cutting these tapered bits, is that if you want to cut that slot and then counter slot it, all you do is to take your router and you use your side fence to go up and down there before you cut this and taper it, and that gives you that slot and counter slot. So turning this one over again, you can see everything is there. The slot, which will conform to whatever guide bush you're making it for. I made it fairly wide at the base so that however big your router, even something enormous like the Festool 2200, you've got a wide enough base to put your clamps far enough apart so you don't wrap your knuckles or hit the handles of your router as you go through. Make the slot as long as you feel like. You can use this for housings as well as for slotting and counter slotting. In fact, this is what I do use this for. Make a bar that's adjustable for stopped housings if you want to. Get it all marked out first, and then probably the easiest thing to do is put your side fence on your router, take your two cutters, one for the through slot, one for the counter slot. Get your bolts first so that you know what size you're aiming at, and with your side fence positioning the router up and down there, same again this way, up and down there, and then take out most of that on your bandsaw, scroll saw, jigsaw, hand saw or whatever, and then you know what's coming next, don't you? You tape your straight edges on just as we did with the smaller one. You cut a little bit just as we did with the smaller one to fill that in. You take your template trim cutter with the bearing over the top. Every manufacturer supplies them. These happen to be from Wealden. And you run the bearing down there and back there, remembering it's a trimming cut, not a cutting cut. So your rough cutting will take you no further away than say 2mm to the pencil line. Get those taped on. Take as long as it takes before you're satisfied that you're in the right position. Use the actual guide bush that you're going to use to check that it runs up and down there nicely. Press them down, make the cut. Then you can trim this off, and again, if you want to, you can rough cut it on the bandsaw and then tape your straight edge on that rough cut pencil line and go down there. Same with that side, and you will get a perfectly smooth square edge, better than I could get with a bandsaw or any other saw, I think. And then just to finish it off, I felt it looked a little better with soft rounded corners. I did that with a little drum sander, but you can take a hand block or whatever if you like. And you end up with this major flat piece. Take your batten. I used a rather thicker bit of batten because it seemed in keeping with the thicker all-round template. And there we are. Glue that on there. Make sure that batten is at right angles to that slot. Notch the centre as we showed with the other one. Take your V-grooving cutter and put a little shallow groove through there. Mark it with a black ballpoint pen. Remember to mark the centre line of your housings. You'll be, in this case, approximately 15 millimetres off if you mark the edge, but mark the centre line. And you've got a rather more sophisticated and rather more versatile version of that little one that we made earlier. So using exactly the techniques plus the extra one of using your side fence to cut these slots, we've made a very much larger version. It's scaled up in all directions. The slot is wider, it's for a 30mm guide bush. The base is wider, so however big your router and however far the handles stick out, you can get your clamps where they won't foul your router or your knuckles. I've put the stop in, which is adjustable for stopped housings, and it looks considerably more substantial than the one we made earlier. But it doesn't make that earlier one redundant, because remember what we did, we slotted and counter slotted a little hinge jig, and we did it like this. Now if you do that with this, it's perfectly possible to do it, but the whole thing is a bit ungainly. This is fine for housings across reasonably wide boards, but I don't think you will regret having made a very basic one for your slotting and counter slotting, and you'll keep this one for your housings. So let us see what we do with it to cut a very versatile range of housings.